So let me welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Today's session will be about climate change and livestock production. It's the fifth session of the webinar series of the subject of climate change and agriculture, organized by the CLICHA Consortium. And those of you who don't already know about our project, I will share my screen for a very brief presentation of the project. So I'm Fepla Kadonaki, I'm the project manager of the Climate Change and Agriculture project. The project aims to enhance the scientific potential of young scientists and equip them with the knowledge and skills to mitigate the impact of climate change on agricultural production. It has been developed under the Erasmus Plus program and especially Key Action 2, Cooperation for Innovation and Exchange of Good Practices. It's a capacity building project, and capacity building projects are transnational cooperation projects, mainly between higher education institutions from partner countries and program countries, especially European countries. And the capacity building projects support the modernization, accessibility, and internationalization of higher education in the eligible partner countries. In our case, the partner country is Tunisia. The consortium is composed of 9 partners. Agricultural University of Athens is the coordinator. Also, the University of Torino and Latvia University of Life Sciences and Technologies support the project from the European side. We have 3 higher educational institutions in Tunisia, the University of Zendouba, University of Carthage, and University of Sousse. 2 Tunisian institutions, one about climate change and one about the development of crops. The project is also supported by one Greek research institution, Democritus, who has been developing the learning platform of the project. And we have also one Greek NGO, Creative Thinking Development. The Climate Change in Agriculture project targets the development of new learning material in 2 languages, English and French, the modernization and update of the university courses in the target universities in Tunisia, the adaptation of the courses to the specific conditions of the southern side of the Mediterranean area, the use of information and communication technologies for delivering the courses by creating specific tools and using specific tools. So we have the website, the e-learning platform. We also use social media and the lecture capture system that has been used in the Tunisian universities. Also, the project tries to strengthen the internationalization of the higher education institutions and their capacity to network effectively in the sectors of research, scientific development, and technological innovation. We also enhance the cooperation between the higher education institutions and the enterprise. And finally, we are disseminating the issue of climate change in agriculture to a targeted but wide audience. This is a screenshot from the learning platform of the project that you can access. Here are the URLs, and soon it will be open access. You can see all the material developed by the project. And here is a screenshot of the website of the project. You can find everything about it and all the deliverables already produced. And finally, I would like to invite you to connect through the social media of the project, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the YouTube. We have a YouTube channel and the Twitter, and we can stay connected there even after the duration of this project. At this point, I would like to welcome both George Laliotis, Assistant Professor at the Agricultural University of Athens, and George Simeon, Associate Researcher at the Hellenic Agricultural Organization Demeter, who will be presenting today the key subject, climate change and livestock production. And first, let me give the floor to George Laliotis. who will make the speech about livestock production towards climate change.
Thank you, Faye, for the intro. If you can, okay, let me share the presentation.
Yes, I will try somehow leave
If you can
the presentation mode, but I
Yes.
can't actually. I don't know why.
Let me stop it if I can. Is it
Okay. There is a bug and I cannot access the controls. Thank
Is
you.
it okay for
Thank you.
presentation?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much for the intro. Good morning to all of you. I would also like to thank Professor Iosif Bizelis for the invitation to participate in this fifth webinar of CLICHA project. My presentation will focus on livestock production towards climate change and if actually is this a threat for livestock or a chance for reconstructive initiatives. This is a short outline of my presentation. First of all, we will speak about livestock production and the challenges that nowadays face. Then we will move on the impact of climate change on animal production and vice versa. We will speak also about the sources of greenhouse gas emissions on livestock units and the available mitigation strategies that already exist, especially in intensive systems. And then we will move on farming systems and their greenhouse gas emissions, giving special attention on intensive and extensive systems and how they can assist on moving on and overcoming the challenges that the livestock production nowadays face. And of course, finally, the conclusions. The increased demands for livestock products, both by terms of quantity and quality, is nowadays a certainty. And this is due to mainly population growth, urbanization, the income rise, as well as the different nutrition needs that people have all around the world. Livestock products are an important agricultural commodity for global food security, as they can provide the 17% and the 33% of global energy and global protein consumption respectively. In addition, livestock production enhances employability as 1.1 billion of people is working on the livestock sector. Today's world's population reaches almost the 7.8 billions with a growing rate of 1%. If this is projected to future, then is expected the population to reach the 9.5 billions in 2050. As a result of this, it means that the needs for animal products are estimated to be doubled up to 2050. And as a consequence, the livestock sector will require more and more amounts of natural resources in order to meet these increased demands. Apart from population growth, animal production is under the challenge of climate change. If we want to give a short definition about climate change, then it can be defined as the long-term changes observed in the distribution of weather patterns over decades to million years of time. Or even simpler, climate, it can be defined as climate transformation observed in the climate of the planet caused by human activities. Between livestock production and climate change exists a two-way effect, meaning that both influence each other and both interact with the other. Global climate change is primarily caused by greenhouse gas emissions that result in warming of the human greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from human activities according to the International Panel of Climate Change. On this graph, we can see very briefly the impact of climate change on livestock production. Of course, climate change will influence livestock production, and actually it will affect livestock through the competition of natural resources, through the quality and the availability of feeds, through the reproduction process in a livestock unit, and especially decreasing the reproduction rate, through the increase of the health status inside the livestock production, and of course through the biodiversity loss. On the other hand, animal production has an impact on climate change, as it is responsible for the 14.5% of the anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. If we would like to quantify this, it means that 7 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year are emitted from the livestock sector. Carbon dioxide equivalent, for those who are not so familiar with the topic, is a standard unit that is used to account for the global warming potential. And of course, it takes into account all the gases emitted from human activities. Greenhouse gas emissions from livestock units mainly account for the methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Methane is mainly produced by enteric fermentation, an internal digestive process that farm animals have, and also by manure storage. Nitrous oxide is arising from manure storage and the use of organic or inorganic fertilizers that we use in order to produce feeds. In regard to carbon dioxide, this gas is emitted mainly from energy consumption that take place on the level of livestock, or in activities that are taking place in the post-farm gate levels. On this graph, we can see how the major sources of responsible for gases emitted by livestock contribute to the total greenhouse gas emissions of a livestock unit. Thus, enteric fermentation, it accounts for the 39% of the total greenhouse gas emissions from a livestock. Feeds, taking into account all the respective activities that are needed in order to be produced, account for the 47%, while the manure management and energy consumption accounts to a lesser extent, to a lesser percentage, reaching the almost 10% and 5% respectively. Here we can see also the major source of greenhouse gas emissions produced by livestock species at farm level. What we can observe is that the ruminant sector, especially beef cattle, dairy cattle, and buffaloes, are responsible for the greater emissions produced for the greater greenhouse gas emissions, and contribute more to the total tank of the greenhouse gas emissions produced by livestock production. This is mainly due to the methane emissions that are coming from enteric fermentation of these species. And generally speaking, methane emissions derived from the livestock sector represent the 30% of global anthropogenic emissions. Up to now, we have seen that livestock production is under the challenge of population growth and under the challenge of climate change. And the question that may arise is if livestock production can cover the future demands, the future food demands as emerged by population growth, but with a greener footprint. In order to answer this question, two sub-questions should be reached. And the first one is if we can tackle the impact of livestock production on climate change. And the second sub-question is under which type of farming system can we meet the increased demands of livestock products with a greener footprint. The first sub-question is actually reflects the available mitigation strategies that already exist towards the environmental impact of a livestock unit. And these strategies can be retrieved if we look and focus on the major sources that are responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions from a livestock unit, which actually, as we saw earlier, are the enteric fermentation, feed production and management, the manure storage, and in a more general mode, the animal management inside the livestock unit. As it regards mitigation measures and feed management or feed production, strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and especially methane emissions are focused mainly on improving the efficiency of animal productivity through the improvement of enteric fermentation process itself. Actually, changing feeding practices can do moderate emissions, and some examples are the following. For example, a 1% increase of dietary fat can decrease enteric methane emissions up to 5%. Feed antibiotics have been shown that can reduce enteric fermentation. The reducing of protein intake may also lead to decrease of nitrogen excreted by animals, while improving diet digestibility can eliminate methane emissions. And when we are speaking about improving diet digestibility, an example is by increasing concentrate feeding. Anti-methanogen vaccines is a promising solution, a promising strategy, which actually can directly reduce methane emissions in the rumen, but little research has been conducted on this topic. Feed additives, finally, like chemical inhibitors, are able also to eliminate methane emissions. In regard to feed production and management, it has been shown that increasing the use of organic fertilizers that are used in the feed production could also decrease greenhouse gas emissions. Rotational grazing systems may also assist to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, while improving grazing land management could enhance carbon sequestration. Physical processing of forages like chopping or gridding could also assist diminishing the enteric methane production in ruminants through the improvement of digestibility. Finally, targeting for higher yield crops for feed production, crops that are specially adapted to climate change, can also assist in lowering greenhouse gas emissions, as this strategy could help and enhance the carbon sequestration. In regard to manure practices, of course, changes in manure management could help to lesser emissions. For example, frequent removal of manure to an outside storage facility could also reduce methane and nitrous oxide emissions over 40%. Solid liquid separation process of manure could also assist to a 30% lesser emissions compared to that of untreated manure. And the same positive effect may have the anaerobic digestion of manure, but only when the produced biogas from this strategy is used in the livestock unit. Lower methane emissions can also occur after manure land application, and this actually means that the decrease of storage time of manure could assist in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from livestock units. Moving on animal management, and generally speaking, the more productive the animal is, the lower environmental impact will have. Improving also fertility in dairy cattle could reduce methane emissions up to 24%, and reduce also the nitrous oxide emissions up to 17%. While an opposite effect have the cattle diseases, which lead to an increase of greenhouse gas emissions up to 24% per unit of produced milk, and up to 130% per unit of produced beef carcass. Here on this slide, we can see the mitigation potential of various strategies that already exist. And what we can see is that strategies that are dealing with manure storage have a higher potential mitigation effect, followed by strategies that are dealing with animal management and especially genetic selection and the improvement of housing systems. But we have left behind the second sub-question, which deals with under which type of farming systems can we meet in order to can we use in order to meet the increased demands for livestock products with a greener footprint. Generally speaking, livestock production, as we already know, is implemented through various farming systems, ranging from the extensive ones up to intensive ones. And if we are talking about quantity, of course, intensive systems have an advantage as they produce more products, more final products compared to extensive systems as it regards the quantity. But what is happening with their environmental impact? According to FAO, mixed crop livestock systems account for the 64% of the total methane emissions, while the respective percentage for grazing systems reaches the 35%. Generally, according also to FAO, intensive livestock systems contribute with 5% to the global greenhouse gas emissions, while extensive systems account for the 13% of these emissions. On this global map, we can see also the total methane emissions derived from enteric fermentation and manure per species and main production system. What we can observe is that grazing systems and mixed ones contribute more to these emissions derived from enteric fermentation and manure, compared to industrial systems, meaning thus intensive systems. So the more extensive the system is, the higher greenhouse gas emissions observed, and under this frame, intensive systems seems to have lesser greenhouse gas emissions compared to extensive systems. And if we take into account also the higher production that they have, Thus, intensive systems have an advantage towards the challenges that livestock production nowadays face. If in this frame also add the available mitigation strategies that we described earlier, mitigation strategies that can easily be adapted, especially in intensive systems and in a more cost-effective way compared to extensive ones, then of course intensive systems have the advantage towards the challenges that livestock production nowadays face, thus population growth and of course climate change. But what is happening with extensive systems? Should they abandon them? Should they eliminate them? In order to answer this question, we should take into account some advantages that extensive systems have. This kind of systems use actually local breeds and in many cases rare breeds that are specially adapted to harsh environments, like for example areas with high humidity or high temperature. They represent also a reservoir of animal biodiversity and as a result constitute an alive genetic pool which could serve as a vehicle for overcoming future challenges. In addition, extensive systems assist to improve the wildfire prevention strategies and moreover require less natural resources due to grazing. Due to grazing also, they assist to enhance sequestration of carbon, while in many cases, as extensive systems are implemented in less favored areas, they help the social cohesion of these areas. Finally, extensive systems are linked with various customs developed over the past years. And under this frame of advantages that extensive systems have, a differentiated product could be produced with a higher added value. If on this frame we add the improvement of productivity of these systems through, for example, a better management practices, and if we add also some mitigation measures towards their environmental impact that they can easily be implemented with a cost-effectiveness way, then a greener footprint could be achieved for these systems. Don't forget that at the past, a similar problem has faced the intensive systems. And a typical example of this problem is the chicken production, which actually producing the same amount of chicken today, like in 1965, has a 50% less environmental impact. And this was achieved due to many factors. The most important of them are the following. This lower environmental impact was achieved through the 75% of fewer resources that nowadays are used in poultry production, the 39% of lesser fossil fuels, the 72% decrease in farmland that is used from poultry production nowadays, and the 58% decrease in water used from poultry sector, plus the environmental friendly energy sources that in many cases are used by the sector nowadays. This kind of framework can be also shed light for adaptation of extensive systems to climate change. Thus, to my opinion, both systems, intensive systems and extensive systems, should coexist. as both systems emerge advantages for mitigating challenges that livestock production nowadays face and will face in the future. So to sum up, livestock production contributes both directly and indirectly to climate change. The sector contributes with almost 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It accounts also for the 9% of global carbon dioxide emissions, but generates a higher percentage of human-related nitrous oxide and methane emissions. The main sources responsible for these emissions from a livestock unit are the digestive process of animals, thus enteric fermentation, the manure, and the energy use. Mitigation strategies are focused on the aforementioned fields at livestock level, while intensive systems seem to have a greener footprint, mainly due to their higher productivity. Extensive systems have a potential to contribute to future challenges if they further adapt to a higher productivity and, of course, to a cost-effectiveness way of mitigation strategies towards their environmental impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George, for this interesting presentation. I think that you already have thrown the ball to George Simeon about the poultry production, that you said that it was a good example in the past. And I think we can go ahead with the second speech about the effects of climate change on poultry production, presented by Dr. George Simeon, Associate Researcher at the Hellenic Agricultural Organization, Demeter. And after that, we can have a discussion session and discuss about the subjects of climate change and livestock production. So, George, you can start sharing your screen. You have the floor.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you very much, Faye. So I believe you can see my presentation. It's true that George gave me a nice pass for my theme today, the effects of climate change on poultry production. And I must say that I feel very happy as a representative of the poultry sector because, as already said, the poultry contribute only a little in climate change. And this is probably mostly due to their high productivity. So let's see the opposite now, how the climate change affects poultry production. Poultry production is probably the most dynamic livestock sector in the world today. And as you can see in the table, it's the most produced meat, poultry meat, followed only by a little by pig meat, and the most highly traded meat in the world. The main reasons for that is that chicken, poultry meat has a low retail price, which means that it is affordable for mainly all types of households. It's not connected to any religious or cultural restrictions that apply to other animals. It's an easy meal to prepare. This is very important for modern households with very few time in their hands for household jobs. It has a lot of processed products, which also makes it easier to prepare a meal for the family. It's very nutritious and it's connected to healthy diets and child development. And it's not only today, but also the future projections for the sector are very positive. In the years to come, the rise in the consumption and production of poultry meat is expected to continue, and it's calculated in more than 60% in the next decade. And this increase is mainly due to the growth of the world's population, which, as George already said, is expected to exceed 8 billion in 2026. This increase will apply mainly to the urban populations in developing countries, who are characterized by an improved standard of living and consequently increased consumption of animal protein. In this graphic, you can see that point exactly, that by 2026, the meat production and consumption, especially for poultry, is expected to rise significantly. But why are there so optimistic projections for poultry meat? Poultry production takes place in facilities where the environmental conditions are fully controlled without being directly dependent on the weather conditions and their sudden changes. This is very important, especially for the context of climate change. This ensures a stable and safe source of animal protein for the world's population. Also, poultry production has low production costs due to the possibility of large-scale production and due to the low feed conversion ratio, which is the smallest and most efficient among farm animals, the productivity that we discussed earlier. And of course, the smallest amount of food per kilogram of produced body weight results in the poultry meat being the meat with the smallest pressure on the environment during its production, since it requires the least area of land per kilogram of product for feed productions. So the future is projected to be very positive for the poultry sector. In order to better understand now the effects of climate change, let's take a brief look on the structure of poultry production. As you probably already know, poultry production is divided in segments. Where everything starts is the reproduction. Here, the amount of hybrids that the baby chicks are produced in order to be directed either to meat production or egg production, which are two separate lines. And either in meat or egg production, so there are several systems that are used nowadays. The most common and most widely used is the conventional system, the more intensive production system, followed by the organic production, free-range production, and of course some other special systems that we will talk about later. There are some common factors, there's some common features in all the productive systems. The first one is that all of them require a building, a facility, a stable in which the chicken will be raised. Maybe in the organic or free-range systems, the buildings are less equipped than the conventional type, where the buildings are fully equipped and working almost automatically. In the organic and free-range systems, we also have outdoor spaces where the children can go out, exercise, and probably graze. This is not a part of the conventional or of the other special systems. In the special systems, we mostly have some differences in the feeding process of the chickens, where maybe more grains are used, for example, 65% of corn or some other types, or generally there are some differences in the feeding regime. The common ground here is that in all systems we have a high stocking density. We have a short rearing time ranging from 42 days in the conventional system to 56 days in the free range, or 81 days in the organic system, speaking about meat production. And of course, we have a high dependence on feedstuff availability, since chickens are raised mostly indoors. They do not graze, they do not use feedstuffs from the outside environment. So, regarding the climate change, there are two major impacts on poultry production. The one is the increase of the surface temperature that is expected in the following years, and that we already are facing nowadays. And this is in terms of heat stress on the animals. And of course, the higher incidence of extreme climatic phenomena, precipitation, heat, wind, etc. This is a problem for every agricultural operation. But let's focus for a moment on the heat stress effects on poultry production. You know, heat stress is a difficult situation for every animal, and every animal tries to find ways to overcome this stress, which if in turn become very high, it can have detrimental effects or even the death of the animal. So the birds, firstly, will try to adjust to heat stress by making some behavioral changes. They will alter their behavior, seeking thermoregulation. So they will spend less time feeding, moving, or walking, and they will spend more time drinking and resting. But apart from the behavioral changes, there are also physiological changes that are also attempts of the animal for thermal regulation and homeostasis. So the main events here are the increased CO2 levels and higher blood pH, which can result in reduced bicarbonate availability and soft egg cell in egg-producing farms. We can have many reproductive problems because the reproductive hormones are going crazy during the heat stress, and this can have a very detrimental effect on semen quality or in the ovaries function. The growth rate is seriously influenced mainly due to the increased corticosterone and the decreased T3 and changes happening in lipid metabolism. And of course, also the immune system is facing some difficult times through immunosuppression, less antibodies, and the lower weight of spleen and thymus that are recorded in birds and chickens under heat stress. All these factors are today measured, and we know that these are the main effects of heat stress on the birds. But how are all these effects quantified in the production? So the main effects, if we see it from a better point of view, from a more productive point of view, is that we have the reduced feed intake, which results, of course, in lower body weight and higher feed conversion ratio. We have a higher fat deposition on the birds, less breast muscle, more thigh muscle, and both muscles with a lower protein content, and of course, lower egg production in the egg-producing farms. All these effects, if we count them together, have been found to cause about $128 to $165 million losses in the poultry industry in the USA. So you see, it's the effects of this heat stress are very serious on the birds. But apart from these, we can say direct effects from the elevation of the temperature, we have also a major indirect effect. We already said that poultry production depends on the production of feedstuffs, either grains or protein feedstuffs. Since grazing is not a common practice in the conventional systems, but even in the free range or organic systems where there are outdoor spaces and grazing is somehow performed, it does not contribute significantly to the feeding of birds. So the feeding of birds is purely relied on the feedstuffs that we buy and offer to the birds. Production now and availability of feedstuff is expected to be highly affected by climate change in the future, both in terms of quantity and both in terms of quality. So it is expected that an elevation of the cost for feedstuffs and a large proportion of that cost is expected to be transferred to the final products, meat or eggs. And there's also a more, if I may say, philosophical question about the human-animal competition for feed, for grains or for protein feedstuffs, which is going to be elevated in the future since the sector is going to expand and more feedstuffs are needed to make this expansion possible. So what can we do? we talked about the adverse effects. What can be done? You know, the recipe for this, for the adaptation is common for all animals. And the first step always is breeding. If we can make the animals adapt better to the heat stress that they are going to experience. It has been found that some local breeds, mainly African breeds like the Fayumi chicken in Egypt, have genes that are linked to heat resistance and makes these breeds better resistant to heat stress. So the challenge here is if we can take these genes and incorporate them in the modern hybrids used for poultry production. Of course, this is not a process that can be done in a year or 2 or 5 or 10. It's a long process. It took almost 20 to 30 years to come to these hybrids that we use today that are so productive. So it is a solution, of course, but I don't think that is something that we can discuss for the near future. Maybe in the about 20 or 30 years from now, we can talk about these genes and how they have been used in hybrids. In a more in a way that we can be done instantly is changes in the feeding practices, because several additives have shown positive impacts during heat stress, like probiotics, oxidizers, or essential oils, and then have been shown to help the chickens adapt better to the consequences of heat stress by increasing feed intake, for example, or improving FCR. And of course, feed formulation is an important also factor, especially for the better protein micro adjustments that must be done so we do not exceed the required amount of protein, because the extraction of protein in the environment is very climate costly. And especially for the organic and free-range systems where the chickens have outdoor spaces, there, of course, shading can be used, like trees, shading constructions, mixed crop livestock systems using, for example, trees as a shade for the birds, or also the concept of agroforestry that it's currently very hot and discussed in the scientific community. The main weight, nevertheless, for the adaptation, it will be on the facilities used for the rearing of the chickens. The buildings, the stables, that of course they should be better insulated in order to overcome the higher heat from the outside. The use of air conditioning, you know, until now in poultry houses we use this construction here, which is the panels, which through the use of water are cooling the air that is inserting the building. Unfortunately, the panels have a limited capacity. They can lower the air temperature by 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 degrees Celsius, not more, and they have the problem that they increase the humidity in the building, which is not good for chickens. So because these the panels have limited capacity, we will be forced, I believe, to change and go to air conditioning machines in order to cool the buildings. And of course, maybe the solution is to lower stocking densities in order to have less chickens in the building, and it will be easier to cool the building. So there are solutions, of course, but they will all result to an elevated cost for the product, for the final product. Of course, we must take into account here that the less need for heating the buildings in the winter may be somehow bring this cost to a lesser extent, we will see some more economic studies will be needed for this calculation. So if we sum up, of course, climate change can affect poultry production mainly due heat stress, extremes in the climate phenomena, and of course the feedstuff availability. There are solutions we can use through breeding, through changes in feeding strategies, and through adaptations of the constructions of the buildings and all the facilities that we use in poultry production. What will be the outcome of all this? Some production cost that it will be put on the product. So maybe it's a little bit safe to say that if climate change and its effects on the planet continue as it goes for the years that we have seen, we can expect a rise in the production cost and a rise in the final prices of the products. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, George, for this very interesting presentation about poultry production in relation to climate change. I believe we can start now the discussion session. If one of the participants has a question that wants to make to the presenters, to George Simon and George Laliotis. I can see there is some questions in the chat. No. So
it's easy because if you just say George, we will both respond.
Okay. Yes, that's why I'm using also your last names. Maybe I can make. I have a questions to make to George Laliotis about the future of research in the different systems, primarily in the extensive systems that we use and their environmental footprint. What can be done? What can we research in the future?
Thank you, Faye, for the interesting question. To my opinion, as we described also earlier, the first step that we should do is to find a solution about mitigation strategies in regard to their environmental impact, and mitigation strategies that would be in a cost-effectiveness way, meaning that these strategies, if they are implemented, they should not increase the cost of the final product. And secondly, to find strategies that can be easily implemented on extensive systems, because as we all know, these kind of systems are quite free-range systems and not intensive that are inside a livestock unit. And another step that, according to my opinion, should be tried to reach is a comparative approach between the environmental impact of intensive systems and extensive ones, but from the point of view at which level should we set the line of measuring these greenhouse gas emissions derived from livestock units. Nowadays, usually there are many of studies conducted showing this environmental impact of different systems, but these systems are studied under different borders, different lines at which we are looking at their environmental impact. Thus, to my opinion, we have to set the same borders for these systems and to look and examine their environmental impact.
Thank you, George.
Hey, if I may.
Yes, you want to pose a
Yes.
question? Yes.
No, just make
Comment.
a comment. Yes, it's the presentation from George was very interesting because us as animal scientists, we often come to a dilemma. The conventional systems, the intensive systems, as we call them, are often blamed for a lot of things, and mostly for being less humane, for having difficult conditions for the animals. But at the same time, as George pointed out, they are more environmentally friendly and they have less greenhouse gas emissions, while the extensive systems that are often used as an example of more humane agriculture, more humane livestock production, are more detrimental for the environment. So this is something that we must somehow manage to equilibrate and to see that which is the main question here. To be more environmentally friendly, then we must all move to conventional production, to intensive systems. Are we trying to be more friendly for the animals? We must move to extensive systems. So where is the balance here? It's a very interesting question.
And also, I think it's a field of research to try to combine both humane and climate change acceptable, let's say, systems.
Correct, Faye. That's why a coexistence of both systems should exist. We should not eliminate none of them.
Also about poultry production, I think we discussed mostly about heat stress, which is something that even today we are experiencing in the Mediterranean, especially in Greece. So do you think this will be the main point for the production, for the poultry production in the future, the heat stress, or other extreme weather conditions will also have consequences, for example, in the poultry production and their pricing?
We can say that heat stress will be a permanent challenge for the sector. Of course, the weather extremes are always a possibility and can affect a lot the production. Okay, tornado may come and rip off all the buildings. But heat stress is something that the sector will face more and more in the upcoming years, especially for the Mediterranean. We see in Greece nowadays that we have more and more days with very high temperatures, and with they are long lasting. They just for 1 or 2 days, they last for a week. So it will be very challenging for the sector to cool all these buildings for a week in so high temperatures. And I think that this is also the point for all the Mediterranean countries and for the African countries even more.
Yes, you are right. I don't know if any other participant wants to make a question now. I have also placed on the chat the questionnaire for the evaluation of the webinar. It will be very, very useful if you could complete it. Now we have also a comment by Ben Mustafa Suha. I will read it. So camels are known by their low expiration of methane compared to the other animals and their adaptation to heat. So this can be a solution, the camels.
Just to be, I'm talking about camels in Greece for many, many years now, and many people in Greece are laughing. But I think that it won't be long since we see camels in Greece.
Yes, you are probably right. Okay.
It would be a solution, but we have not until now some adaptation plans in regard to their husbandry here in Greece. We know that their milk is highly nutritious, but we have similar example from other kind of animal farming that were came into Greece, but they failed. So
Yes,
we first look about adaptation plannings and business plans and how we can have a husbandry with high adaptability to the needs that people want, and then we will move on.
Yes, and to also point that in Greece we have breeds, especially sheep breeds, that are raised in very dry and with very few precipitation environments, like the Greek islands. So probably these animals will also be a guide for us for the new era of heat stress.
Okay, so if we have any other comments we want to make on the subject or questions, I think the webinar is over. I would like to thank you all for being here with us today on this very interesting topic. And here in Greece, at least it's a day representative of the climate change. We have been in a heat stress for over a week now. So not only the animals, but we ourselves are pretty much exhausted. Okay, thank you very much. And we hope to see you in our next webinar. We will plan one. So thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye to all.